Alright, CNT125 Orientation Lab. We're just getting finished up with the first part on IP address settings, static and dynamic. Before we move on, at the end of this section here, just a reminder, make sure you have dynamic IP addresses on both PCs and you do your IP config so you can see that dynamic IP address. Here's the dynamic IP for this one. The college assigns us, the internet, I'm using little air quotes here, the college assigns us a 172.21, so there's our dynamic IP. And then I literally pinged the other PC, which had a 172.21.40.60 IP address. So I made sure both of those things worked, and then I copied these results, these right here, from my dynamic IP address setting, and then my ping here, and I added them to my text file. So here on my text file, I put a little note that this was my dynamic IP address configuration section, and I pasted in the IP config and then my ping. So there we are, finishing up that part of the lab. All right, moving to part two. Actually, part one, that's a task we're going to do over and over and over again this semester, setting IP addresses and returning IP addresses. The next major task that's here is a console connection to our network devices. Again, here's another task we're going to do over and over again in the lab. When we need to connect to and configure switches, when we need to connect to and configure routers, we need to use a console connection. The routers and switches don't have monitor, keyboard, and mouse ports, so what we do is we use our PC and connect to the router and switch to send commands over, and the router sends results back to our PC and displays them on the screen. And we do that using a console cable, as well as our console utility Putty in this case. There is a separate podcast on D2L that actually shows you, it's me actually showing you the blue cable connecting to the PC and connecting to the router and switch. So use that if you need help. Again, watch that before coming to the lab room. So we're going to do that for our switch and our router and gather, the basic config that's on both of these. So on my PC now, the PC that's next to the equipment rack, we are going to console into the top Cisco switch, the one we were using earlier. So I'm going to get the blue console cable off the room network equipment rack. I'm going to locate this top switch, and I'm going to connect the console cable to the back of the PC, as well as to the serial port in the back of the PC, as well as the console port on the back of the switch. I've actually done this already on this PC. I have my console cable plugged into the back of the PC, and then the back of the switch in the console port. Now that I've done that, I'm going to launch Putty for my connection. All right, so let me close my command prompt. I don't need that right now. And I'm going to leave my notepad file handy. I'll just minimize that. And I'm going to launch Putty. On my desktop here is Putty. And I'm going to launch this guy. And I should be using COM1 serial connection. And my default setting should be, if I load these a second, actually if I double click on these, if I do this right here, COM1 serial 9600, and just save this as my default setting, I should be able to open and have what almost looks like a command prompt window show up. This is my Putty connection. Now, right now, there's nothing showing because I haven't sent any commands to the switch. So if I hit the enter key, the switch should respond to me with some information. And it has. Now, let me get my screen a little larger. Let me do our settings. Let's get our font a little bit larger. And there it is right there. I need to change that. Let me make him at least maybe 16. There we go. Okay. Once I hit the enter key, I basically asked the switch to respond to me. So it sent back some information of like, hey, you're trying to connect to me. Would you like to use the initial system configuration dialog? Over here, when you see that, I have a reminder in here if you're going to say no. That's a setup program we do not want to use. So I'm going to type no and hit enter. And I should now get a switch prompt. I have now connected to the switch and I'm communicating with the switch. If I keep hitting the enter key, it keeps showing me a prompt. It's like, okay, give me a command. So I'm connected in, I'm consoled into the switch, and could actually make configuration, or I should actually start putting commands or running commands on the switch to do things. Well, I'm at a user mode. I want to get to the privilege mode or configuration mode, if you will. So I'm going to use the command enable. When I do that, the prompt changes to the pound sign here. It's not exciting, but that now lets me know I'm in admin mode or privilege mode. I can now actually run commands and do things on the switch. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a show run. And that says, hey, please show me your running configuration on the switch. And it's building that for me and showing it to me. You notice here I say you might need to use the spacebar to be able to show more pages of the running configuration. So it says more down here. I'm going to hit the spacebar. It's going to display more. Hit the spacebar. Hit the spacebar. This is showing me all the ports on the switch. Down here is showing me any other configuration that might be on the switch, like IP addresses or anything. Right now, this is a blank switch. That's hopefully what you're seeing. Hopefully nobody left config behind. That's what we should be seeing on our switch. We've now consoled into the switch, and we're actually communicating with the switch. Excellent. That's a task we're going to do over and over and over again. So what I'm going to have you do is, before we leave this, let's copy this config and add it to our text file. And that shows that we've actually consoled in. So I'll come up here, and I'll grab all these commands, and I'll go the whole way down. And now Control-C on this one, not so much. I'm going to hit the Enter key. The Enter key is going to copy this, and I will take my text file, and I'll put a note here that this is my switch console connection. I'm going to do Control-V. The Enter key over here copies. Over here I can do Control-V to paste. Yeah, there's a little quirkiness in dealing with some of these. So there's my switch console connection. Yahoo! So again, I will save that. And I can just exit out of here. I can do exit, and it's basically back to where I started. And I'll close this connection out. And now I'm going to repeat this process, but for my router. So I'm now going to take my console cable and I'm going to connect into the 2011 router. The 2011 router is probably the largest router in your rack. It'll be maybe a device or two away from the switch. Again, the console port's on the back near the power cord, and it's blue, just like the blue console cable. So I'm going to plug into its port. I'm going to relaunch Putty again. And I'm going to do this same process, but for the router. So COM1, 9600, serial, I'll say open. Hit the Enter key a couple times. And let me get my screen a little bit larger again for you. Appearance, font. I think I'll need to make this my default. And this time, the router says, would you like to enter initial configuration dialog? Again, that's a setup program I don't want to use, so I'm going to say no. I'm going to hit the Enter key. Okay, and again, I'm going to hit the Enter key another time or two, and it'll finish its logging in. It actually needs to finish kind of like its boot sequence here, if you will, but now I get a router prompt. So now I'm actually connected into the router and could actually send commands or ask for results from the router. So just like the switch, I'm in a user mode right now, so I'm going to use the enable command. That's going to get me to my privilege mode. So now I can actually do some administrative tasks, and the first one we're going to do is we're going to do a show run. It says, hey, let me see the running configuration on this router. Same thing, I'm going to use the space bar to keep displaying additional screens. And if I look in here, up towards the top, I'm just kind of scrolling up and down now. This shows the different ports on the router. There's no configuration on them at this point. And down here are some different other types of ports that are on the router that we'll be eventually using. So I've connected into the router like I would be configuring it. Again, this is something we're going to do next week, literally next week in our lab, and most labs from here on out. So on this one, I'm going to copy this as well. I'll copy all these down. Right, I'm just highlighting them all. I'm going to hit the Enter key to copy. I'm going to go over to my text file, and I'll put here a note that this is my router console connection. And I'll do a Control-V and paste it in and save my updated file. So there's me consoling into the router. Again, these are tasks we're going to do repetitively this semester, so at least we have kind of the basics worked out that I can do this without having to worry about this while I'm working on something new. So there's my router and switch console connections. What I'm going to do now is I can literally close out Putty. I don't need that open anymore. I can disconnect my blue console cable, put it back on the equipment rack at the side of the room, and we'll be able to move on to the next part of our lab. The next part of the lab, we're going to be doing a little bit of intro with Packet Tracer.